this morning, and thank you for coming out. Thank you for the tech team who have been working so tirelessly in the background. All right, so this morning we've got 45 minutes, and there's a lot to cover. So what I want to do this morning is it's basically going to be a bit of an introduction to set a worldview framework, which is going to apply next week as well. So next week there'll be more evidence around the flood, dinosaurs, and so on. But I do need to just outline where we stand as believers, where we stand in a world that is now increasingly, apparently, becoming more anti-God and so on. So how do we actually have a cogent faith where we can love the Lord, but also have an answer for the hope that's within us? So can you all hear me okay? And can you all see the screens? Most important, there's lots of slides in here. So, all right, let's get underway. All right, so evidence for creation. So creation, we talk about, even secular people say, like to be out in nature and creation, don't we? So it's a word that's used a lot. But is there evidence? Do we see evidence around us of creation rather than where it's all just happened by itself? So what we need to do is, first of all, go back to understanding where we as human beings have a basis for our worldview. And the three big questions that we as humans all need to ask, whether we sit down deliberately and go through line by line and think it through, go on a retreat, work it all out, or whether we push it aside and just think, it's too hard, I don't want to think about it. The number one question is, where did I actually come from? That's the big picture of origins. What led to me living as a human being on planet Earth today? This is the big picture of origins. And the answer we believe to that one will affect how we answer the next two. Why are we actually here? What's our identity? Who am I? What's the purpose, the meaning of life? What do I live for? What do I fear, etc.? All that thing about meaning of life, identity. These are really big issues, aren't they, for young people, especially today? Even who am I? Who am I? And lastly, of course, we live in a fallen world. We all get older and our bodies wind down. Yes, even my manly specimen. But if the Lord comes back beforehand, as he's promised he will, we know that. But if he doesn't, within our own lifetime, then we eventually die, don't we? All of us reach the end of the road physically. Is that all there is? We just become buried or ashes or whatever? Or is there something beyond that for us as human beings? Three really important questions. And the questions that we answer and the way we answer will affect how we live our lives. So just briefly coming back to this thing about where do we actually come from? Now, there's one answer I could offer you, ladies and gentlemen, today from God's Word. The reference manual, the instruction book from our manufacturer. In the very first page of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, it talks about how God created the heavens and the earth and everything in them in 6 ordinary days, and he rested on the 7th day. And there's the order of creation as outlined in Genesis chapter 1. You'll notice on day 6, he's created all the land animals, and he's also created our great-great-great-great-grandparents, supernaturally created, made in the image of God. They had no parents, they were created by God, infused with life, infused with the Spirit, for relationship with their Creator, relationship with each other, and a stewardship mandate to care for and develop and to enjoy and study the planet that he'd made for them. So that's a really straightforward understanding, if we believe creation, that God created us, we're made in his image, we have identity, purpose, and value in his eyes. But also, as we know, Adam and Eve disobeyed, the fall came in, and all of creation began to fall apart. Therefore, we are all descendants of Adam and Eve. Therefore, we cannot save ourselves. We need a Saviour. And Ephesians chapter 2, 8 and 9 clearly says this, that no matter how good we are, we cannot save ourselves. For by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. Absolutely. It's not the result of works, so no one may boast. Okay, so God created a perfect world. Our sin marred it. And we'll see evidence as we go through why the world reflects the fallenness of creation now. But Adam and Eve, of course, they were our original ancestors, and we have inherited that sin nature from them. So that's why we need Jesus, the Creator, to save us from our sin. But of course, people will say, well, that's a great account of, if you believe that, it gives you comfort, that ancient creation myth from some shepherds thousands of years ago. But we know from science that it's a very different account, isn't it? 13.7 billion years ago. That's being re-questioned at the moment. We see that hydrogen gas formed from the Big Bang, and over billions of years of cosmic evolution, stars forming, galaxies forming, And eventually in our local area here, we end up with a protostar, the sun, a disk of gas and dust floating around it. And eventually, over millions of years, planets and asteroids all formed. They cooled down, and Earth, about 4.5 billion years ago, formed. And eventually, oceans and an atmosphere came from somewhere, I'm not sure how. And then eventually, life got started in this soup of chemicals. And over billions of years of natural selection, evolution, mutation, upwards and upwards until here you are today. You're just the result of rearranged hydrogen gas over billions of years. It's just chance, physics and chemistry. There's no supernatural, no creator. It's just blind, pitiless indifference. Now, do you feel special? Do you feel like you've got a purpose in life? You've got a hope? If you just rearrange stardust? But most people today, especially in the Western world, would believe the second one is a scientific fact. We've proven that. The first one is a creation myth. And this idea of evolution now has actually gone way beyond this idea of cosmic, geological, chemical, biological and human evolution. It's now affecting everything in society. We see everything being redefined, don't we? This whole postmodern idea, identity, everything from music to art to politics to sport, everything's been redefined, everything's been reimagined and deconstructed and rechanged in different ways. And so really, evolution is now seen as an explanation for everything. You'll often see in articles it says, from an evolutionary biology point of view, this is what happened, or this could have happened. Everything's explained as a result of evolution. So we have a very simple choice to make today. Do we actually believe the manufacturer's manual or not? That's what it boils down to. Can we trust this book that's been given to us by the Creator God? Or do we feel this is not trustworthy? There's some other form of truth which is more credible than this. So we throw this aside and we go to some other form of truth as we see it. So we have a simple choice, don't we? And of course, in the Western world, I'm now in my early 60s, and I was brought up originally in the UK and then brought up in Nelson. And I've lived in Hamilton, by the way, for the last 40 years. So I'll talk briefly a bit later about my background. But yeah, so back in the 60s and 70s, we used to go down the shops. Mum and Dad would leave the keys sitting in the car when they went into the shop and come out. And often people would leave their front door open for the summer holidays and people would come and go. Can we do that today? Something's changed, hasn't it? Our society has changed. Now this next slide is a quote from a guy called A.C. Grayling, who's a famous atheist and philosopher from the UK. And he was interviewed in 2011 about the condition of the society in the UK. And he made a very astute quote about the UK, and this applies to us as well. He said, you can tell that we no longer really believe in God because of all the cameras watching us. You see, when you don't have that gentle divine hand on the shoulder, that internal policeman, the Holy Spirit giving us a conscience, once that's gone, anything goes, isn't it? So when people don't have that check within their own hearts, then they have to be watched and surveilled from the outside. So I'm just going to do it once this week, and I won't do it next week, but I want to just introduce who we are as Creation Ministries. And we have a key scripture that I love and we use as the basis for our ministry. And that's 1 Peter 3:15. And it says, in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. It's all about Jesus, isn't it? He's our Lord. He's holy. We should honor him and love him. But always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that you have. So if you're a Jesus follower, no matter whether you're just starting out or whether you've walked with him for decades, each of us has a story of what Jesus has done in our life. He's made a difference. He's given us a hope. He's helped us to be preserved from things we may otherwise have done. So when you share your testimony, your Jesus story, do it with love, but also do it with gentleness and respect. Okay, no one wants a Bible-bashing, legalistic, you dirty sinner type thing. We're all less than perfect. I certainly am. But Jesus has made a difference in my life. So I talked about the three big questions. What about questions like this? I'm excited to hear that you are a very evangelical church going out into the streets and planting churches. This is neat, to see the whole church, not just four walls. You're out there in the community sharing the gospel. But if you individually or as a church share the gospel with people, maybe you get questions like this reflected back to you. Well, you believe the Bible. What about carbon dating? That's proved that the world is millions of years old, hasn't it? And what about dinosaurs? Are they mentioned in the Bible? How do you answer dinosaurs from a Christian point of view, if you believe the Bible? And what about all the evidence supposedly for evolution, ape-men fossils and all the missing links and so on? How do they fit into your worldview? And what about, you believe in the flood, the ark? Oh, come on, that's ridiculous. How did Noah put millions of different animals onto the ark and look after them for all that time? And what about the different people groups, the different skin colours, different ethnic groups? Are they surely the result of different evolutionary paths over thousands or millions of years? How do you answer that as a Christian? And the big one is, of course, how can an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God allow so much suffering and pain in the world? How do we answer that? Good questions, aren't they? I've heard those. Can we actually answer those? So Creation Ministries International, many of you will know about us. We are non-denominational, we're non-political, we are a donation-funded ministry. Yes, we have got resources for sale, but by far our main income is from people who donate, people like you who donate to us and our ministry. And our mission is very, very simple. We're here to support the effective proclamation of the gospel. So it's not about science and creation evolution per se, it's about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And what we do is we're an equipping ministry that comes into a church like this. We do different messages, and we hopefully provide the seeds of credible answers to you about why the Bible is reliable, especially its Genesis history. And we have a very simple ministry model, which is called linking and feeding. We come into a church, we link, and as we get resources into your hand, you then move out and feed those out to people around you. And so next week there'll be an opportunity afterwards next week, so I'm going to go very quickly through. We've got the website. It's a really, really powerful resource for you. I can certainly talk to you about that more next week. And also our weekly Info Bites email. This is a great way to connect to our ministry. You have different articles that come up, and you then can find out about them through our email. And AI, how do we deal with that? All right, there's a sign-up sheet, which I'll do again later. Right, so before we just go looking at the evidence for creation, which is what you're here for, but I want you to understand, young people especially, many of them brought up in the church, they go to Sunday school, they go to youth group, they go to church, but once they move out, they're often affected. And many of them, up to 2/3 in the Western world, will say, I no longer believe in Christianity. I'm now a free thinker. That's tragic, isn't it? I know in my own family, I've got extended family, nieces and nephews and others who have walked away from the Lord. And the Bible Society in New Zealand did a survey in 2017 and 2022. And the simple question was, do you identify as a Christian? Okay, so here's the results from 2017. You see the different age groups there? And these are people who, whether you're a full-on Christian or whether you're just sympathetic to Christianity, but people who were asked that, do you describe yourself as Christian? That's the results in 2017. Okay? It's quite low, isn't it? They did the same survey in 2022, and what's encouraging is, basically, we had an increase almost across the board, didn't we? People who are now, this is post-COVID, the whole thing, people are now coming in and actually saying, I identify more strongly with Christianity, except for one group, and this is the group here. They've gone down even further, haven't they? So what happens when from 46% to 14% within a couple of years, what's happened? It's when they move out and especially go to university where they're targeted and they have all sorts of pressures and temptations on their lives. And the number one reason given by young people who said, I no longer believe in Christianity, there's lots of different reasons, and this may be an excuse, but the number one reason was because evolution and science refutes too much of the Bible. I can't be a thinking young person and believe this book of myths. Okay, so again, science, we need to very quickly look at science because this affects how we look at biology and geology, which we're going to do for the remainder of the talk. So the key thing about what is science? The kind of science that gave us all the amazing modern innovations, space travel, medicine, internet, all these things came out of what we call operational science. But if we find something like a fossil, and I have a fossil here. Now, some people laugh at this and say, I think I'm the fossil, but no, this is really a fossil. It's a fossil of a crab found in South Canterbury. And I've had this for about 8 to 9 years, and it's never moved. So I reckon it's dead. You reckon this crab's dead? So whenever you find, I'm not dead. Okay, so this is a fossil. So when I pick up my fossil, all I have is some evidence in my hand now. I don't know when it happened, how it happened, etc. All I have is the evidence now. So I have to use a different kind of science to study my fossil. And that's called historic or forensic science, where we have evidence in the present and we come up with an account of what happened in the past based on our worldview. So in summary, operational science is observable, testable, and repeatable. So the kind of science that happens in the lab day after day, and then engineers then take that ideas and produce products and different ideas from those scientific advances. Operational science is observing, testing, and repeating. But historical science, you cannot observe this forming, you can't repeat it, and you can't test it. So you have to actually use a different kind of worldview to look at this and say, I believe this happened X years ago because of my worldview. It's not scientific. So the key thing is, and as we go through, think about this, the evidence, there's no dispute about the evidence. No one disputes the fossil. No one disputes the rock layers that they see, the measurements and the chemical composition. It's the same evidence. We all agree on the evidence. Where the disagreement is, it's actually over the history of that evidence. So it's not, you've got your faith and your imaginary friend and your book of myths, and if that gives you comfort, I respect that, but evolution is a fact. You hear that? Evolution is a fact. It's science. I've got science, you've got faith. But both creation and evolution are actually historical or faith-based worldviews. You cannot test either scientifically. So, and again, as I go through some of these examples, you're going to see Creation Magazine articles presented. Creation Magazine is a really amazing resource, and next week I'll give you the opportunity to have a look at it, maybe subscribe. But it's a powerful resource for families and for outreach and evangelism. You get a printed copy and also digital copies included in the sub. All right, so let's just quickly look at this whole thing about creation and evidence for creation. So Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, that really sets the framework for us as people who live in the world. We look around at nature, we look at the heavens, we look at the world around us, and it says clearly in verse 19, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So we are without excuse." So what it's really saying is that God, even though God is invisible, the evidence of his handiwork, of his creative power, of his design genius is everywhere to be seen if only our eyes were open. So I've got a quick question for you. Is design actually obvious? Do you think design's obvious? Okay, I've got two pictures to show you. I want you to tell me, is there any evidence of anything in these pictures that are designed or have intelligent input, and why? So does anyone think there's any design in this picture? Okay, what do you reckon is designed? Stack of rocks? So why do you think that's just a pile of rocks? Why is that clear evidence of design or intelligent input? Yeah, so you just don't find in nature rocks stacked like that, do you? It's basically impossible in the natural world to have rocks stacked up like that. But also, of course, the plants, we believe the plants are also designed, aren't they? What about the next picture? Is there any design in this picture? So what's designed? Yeah, it is. Exactly, yeah. Colour, variety, it's evidence of beauty, isn't it? But the atheists would say the vase is designed by a clever potter, but the flowers just evolved by chance over time. There's no design in the flowers. See, your lens is, design is clearly obvious to everyone, isn't it? But whether we choose to believe certain things are designed or not is based on our worldview. It's not a scientific choice. So I believe that, the plants, the tussock and so on there, as well as that pile of rocks, there was intelligent input into those things, as well as the flowers and the beautiful vase. Of course, we go back to atheists, talking about the Big Bang next, here we have Alan Guth, and he actually made a famous statement. He said, this is talking about the Big Bang, the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, zero, nada. That means nothing. And as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. How is that possible? That seems to me like he believes in miracles, doesn't he? We believe in miracles, that creation is miraculous, but we have a miracle worker. Atheists don't. So looking again quickly at the evidence for design in the solar system and in the universe. Psalm 19 verses 1 to 3, it says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Not sure if you stood out in a beautiful crystal clear starry sky away from artificial light. It's just stunning, isn't it? You just look up at the vastness of the heavens. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. So the heavens alone are evidence of creation, aren't they? So we believe we live in a very special place. Earth is a very amazing planet. So here we have, not to scale. These sizes are to scale, but the distances are clearly not to scale. But right there, that little blue dot between Venus and Mars is our little home. A little tiny rock, third rock from the sun. Remember that TV show? Yeah, third rock from the sun is Earth. And it is absolutely unique. And if we look at all the evidence as why Earth is absolutely unique, we believe in the universe, is that we have so many things that are just right. The right sun. The sun is the right size. It's relatively stable compared to many other stars. And the energy it emits is just right for us, for life to continue. Yes, it does have cosmic rays and the solar wind, but that's where the next thing is that comes in. We're the right distance away, and our orbit is nearly circular. It's not quite circular, but it's nearly circular, giving us very even seasons. If we went out in a big ellipse round, we would freeze and fry over time. But no, the Earth's the right distance away from the sun, and it has a near circular orbit. We have a magnetic shield. The magnetic field of the Earth protects us from the solar wind. It gives us ozone and gives us all that protection from UV light as well. The continents, also the rock and minerals, are the right to give us different soil types to support life. The minerals, the trace elements and so on, come from the amazing structure of the rocks on Earth. We have the right composition of the atmosphere. Basically 70% or so of nitrogen, and then oxygen and other trace elements below that. That gives us oxygen to breathe, but not so much that we would catch on fire. So you have to have the right amount of oxygen, lots of more inert nitrogen. It's not inert, but it has a damping effect on fires and so on. And we also have other elements that are in there, like helium and argon and so on. So we have the right atmosphere. We also have many cycles that God's designed into the Earth, the carbon cycle, the oxygen cycle, the hydrological cycle, and nitrogen cycles. These are things that convert and move around all the time, giving us amazing balance in the world. The world's been incredibly well designed for stability and for life. And our moon is really important too. It's the right size. It's big compared to the size of our planet. It's almost unique like that. And its distance and its orbit gives us the tides that help to oxygenate the oceans and the coastal regions. It gives us night, gives us light. The reflected light of the moon gives us night illumination. And so the moon is also really special. It's part of the system, the sun, earth, moon system. So I think we can actually really call it the Goldilocks planet. Again, very hastily gone through a list, but these are unique things that give us the pleasant environment we can live in. So I reckon everything's just right. It's not perfect, and we do live in a fallen world, but God has designed our planet as being an incredibly amazing place. But there's also something else. I think God, in his love and mandate for us, he said, look, when you get, different stages, you'll actually develop science. You'll develop the way to observe nature, observe creation, and give me the glory. And so it's interesting that the sun and the moon, the sun is actually 400 times larger in diameter than the moon, and it's 400 times further away from us. So basically the sun and the moon are 400 times different in distance. That's really convenient, isn't it? Because that means from Earth, when we look up and we see the disk of the sun and the moon, to us on Earth, they appear the same size, or almost the same size. Is that just a lucky coincidence? Over billions of years of time, we happen to live in a time now when the sun and moon have the same apparent size on the Earth. Or is it something God's saying, look, enjoy. Now you can actually go and you can actually study the corona of the sun when you have a solar eclipse. It's just, to me, it's just something else saying God is saying to us, enjoy it, study it. Give me the glory and praise for this. And you'll see an eclipse. I've never actually seen a full solar eclipse, but the actual, what they call the area of totality, the actual dark patch that goes across the Earth is only about 200 kilometres wide. It's tiny, isn't it? So you have to be in the right place at the right time to ever see an eclipse. But my mum, when she came out from England in the 50s, in New Zealand there was a total solar eclipse, and she remembers that it really got dark and all the chickens went back into the roosts, and it was just quite eerie almost, but also beautiful to see this solar eclipse happening. To me, that's just another fingerprint of God, that he's given us eclipses to be able to study and to enjoy. Okay, so that's one evidence for design. I believe design in the solar system, design in the Earth, design in the systems that support us on our beautiful planet. Now, our friend, Professor Richard Dawkins, about biology. Now, he's not a biologist, he's actually an animal behavioural scientist, but he's a very, very famous atheist, isn't he? One of the, the 5 atheists back in the day. And he said about biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. So he said, yes, biology is complex, and it looks like it's designed, it's complex, and it has the appearance of design. Notice that? The appearance of design. Physics, however, is the study of simple things that do not tempt us to invoke design. And you see, the book he actually drew that from is called How Evolution Shows Us a Universe Without Design. Okay? Evidence of evolution reveals a universe without design. So he totally denies design in nature. He absolutely rejects that, not scientifically, but from his own personal worldview. Now, the Bible is not a science textbook. Okay, I'm glad it doesn't, because science textbooks keep getting revised and changed over time. But the Bible does make a series of claims which do have a scientific claim to them. And we should be able to test the Bible's claims in the areas of geology, as I'll do next week, and biology, as well as archaeology and prophecy and so on. And when it comes to biology, the Bible makes some claims. The first is that everything reproduces after its kind. Okay, so the idea of kinds, they're not species, they're kinds. So-and-so, or this particular plant or creatures or whatever, reproduce after their kinds. And also after the fall, of course, we would expect that all of creation is groaning, everything is going downhill. So we should see genetic decline across time. Not evolutionary increase in genetic complexity, but we actually see fitness falling apart everywhere. And also all people groups will be very, very closely related. That's another claim that the Bible would make biologically. And we should be able to test that through microbiology, genetics, and so on, and we can. And the flood and the Babel dispersion after the flood best explain how people, plants, and animals are distributed around the world today. I'll talk about that next week. So these are claims the Bible makes that impinge upon biology. And the first thing, coming back to this idea of kinds, Genesis chapter 1, it talks about the idea of kinds. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth. And so it was so. And going on to the animals and birds and so on, it said, the great sea creatures according to their kinds, every winged bird according to its kind. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. So the idea of kind is a really big deal from the Bible's point of view about biology. So I've got 3 diagrams next, which are in your notes. I wanted to show you this idea of the worldview of origins when it comes to biology. And the first one is, they're fairly simplistic each one, but they clearly show you this idea of how biology has changed over time. So there's a big term, morphology, which means change or body shape. It's basically shape or outline or form. And we have time. So the standard evolutionary model is that everything goes back to an original common ancestor billions of years ago. And over time, there's an increase of natural selection, mutation, and so on. Over time, things have become more complex, have become more diverse. Some have become extinct over time, but we have this rich array of species around the world today from an original common ancestor. So we all go back to the original pond scum or original thing that crawled out of the ocean or whatever. We all have a common ancestor going back. They call it Luca, the last universal common ancestor. No one knows where that was, what it looked like, but there's this idea of a common ancestors to everything, to a cabbage, to humans, to a snail, to an eagle. We're all related back to a common ancestor. So that's the evolutionary tree, which now is being really, they said, we don't really believe that. That's simplistic. It's more like a bush. But the idea is still from simple to complex, diverse over time, is the evolutionary worldview, requiring huge amounts of new information to be put into the genome. The next one is actually sometimes used as a straw man argument to debunk the Bible. This is what we call, it's basically the idea of the fixity of species, that when God created everything, if he created it all, he created all the species. So you end up with, pied stilts and black stilts and, rainbow trout and tigers and lions and everything on day of creation, and everything stayed the same since creation. Some have become extinct and some are still here. That is actually completely false, okay? Scientifically and scripturally, the Bible does not teach that, and it's easily debunked. So don't fall for that idea that God created everything at creation the way they are today. The Bible clearly talks about this idea of kinds. So we have the cat kind, the horse kind, the equine kind, and all the different major kinds of creature, and they were created with rich front-loading of genetic information that could diversify and adapt, giving you different species over time. So natural selection is a scientific fact. We have no problem with that. It's part of the biblical model of adaptation, breeding, selection. But the word selection means selecting away from what exists already. So here we have the different kinds. Over time, they've become more diverse, and some have become extinct. So that's the biblical account of creation, which stacks up scientifically with what we see. So I'm going to show you an example of the idea of change. Do creatures change? Do you think creatures change over time? They do, yeah. I've got a great example here. So anyone here got a dog? Dog owners? Not too many, the number of people here. Oh, okay, somebody's got a dog. Okay. So dogs are a really good example. You think of the variety of dogs, wild and domestic, in the world today. So almost everyone would agree that all the dogs we have today, both domestic breeds and wild dogs around the world, like dingoes and coyotes and African hunting dogs, huskies and so on, they all came from an original wolf-like ancestor a few thousand years ago. That's basically completely agreed on, whether you believe in millions of years in evolution or whether you believe the biblical account. So you see that original ancestor was medium size, erect ears, long tail, medium length fur, middle of the road, genetically rich. And over time, if we wanted to maybe select from these slightly tame wolf-like ancestors that come to our village, we start selecting and breeding the biggest and scariest of these litters to get ourselves a guard dog. And over time, if we keep selecting the traits we want, we'll end up with a Great Dane or something like that. Very cute, isn't it? But you see, the original ancestor had all the genetic potential to be expressed. Its morphology, its body form, could actually be a Great Dane. All the instructions were in the original ancestor to create a Great Dane. Is that evidence of evolution? Amazing, isn't it? Now, what if we wanted to go the other way? We want to select for small and cute to have a little toy dog we can dress up and play with. We keep selecting for small and cute and tame until we end up with chihuahuas. You see, but again, the original ancestor had all that genetic potential to be expressed as a chihuahua. Isn't it amazing? So when God created the original kinds, they were genetically rich with all that potential. And over time, selection, natural and artificial, has weeded away certain traits and amplified other ones until we end up with the differences. Now, what's amazing is a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are actually the same species biologically. They're Canis lupus familiaris. It's amazing. And potentially, I wouldn't recommend trying this, they could potentially breed. Obviously, if the Chihuahua was mum, it would go badly wrong, wouldn't it? But yeah, they are the same species within the science. And you look at the difference. If you dug up a fossil of a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, you would say these are not even the same creatures, let alone the same species, would you? So look at the amazing difference in form you can have through natural selection from a rich genetic ancestry. But here's the kicker. Is this great evidence for evolution? Sounds like it, doesn't it? Except if something happened and it wiped out all the dogs in the world except for Chihuahuas, we all know what would happen. You cannot go back. You've lost so many other traits. You could not go back to anything else apart from a Chihuahua. You've weeded out all the other major traits. You can't go back to largeness, etc. Okay, so natural selection weeds away. It doesn't create, and mutations just destroy things. So we see natural selection is actually going the wrong way for evolution. So again, very quickly in closing this part here is there are three major claims the Bible makes that we should be able to easily debunk the Bible through modern genetics. These are three testable predictions in the Bible that have a biological and scientific claim. The first one is that we all came from an original two ancestors, a founding couple, just two people. All of humanity, thousands of years ago, came from two people. The flood, about 1,600 years after creation, just killed all the people, destroyed all the people in the world except for 8. And so we had a huge population bottleneck down to 8 individuals. And I don't know whether Noah and his wife had other children, but certainly from the 3 sons and their wives, we have 3 major streams. And therefore we should be able to see from Y chromosome, which is passed down the male line, all going back to Noah and his 3 sons. And we also have mitochondria, which goes through the female line, and that should be clearly identified, 3 separate daughters-in-law of Noah. And what do we see from modern genetics? We see a very, very common Y chromosome across all human males, and we see 3 major streams of mitochondrial DNA across human females throughout the world. This strongly enforces this idea of the Bible's account makes sense and stacks up scientifically. And lastly, of course, we end up with, after the flood, people began to repopulate and to grow, but they stayed in one place. And God said, look, I told you to spread out, to develop the world, to enjoy it, and to give me the glory. But no, you're staying in one place, deciding you're God, and you want to build this tower. You want to be like me. So he brought another judgment after the judgment of the flood, and he dispersed the people by confusing their language, and they then moved out on family lines, taking a subset of that original genetics from the family groups. So as they moved out, away from Babel, they carried a subset. Again, they've already lost genetic diversity, and over time, natural selection begins to amplify different traits, like those who moved into hot climates. If you have more melanin in your skin, you have better protection against skin cancer and so on. So you'll do better than someone who's very pale. If you go to cold areas like Scandinavia, where there's little sunlight, having light skin gives you an advantage. You'll get more vitamin D from the sunlight. And you'll have less chance of rickets and other things. So natural selection will give you a favour in certain areas, which will amplify certain bodily features. And of course, language will develop as well. So the Bible clearly talks about this idea, our family tree, our whakapapa for our Maori brothers and sisters, our ancestry going back to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, 2 real people, living at a real point in history, having real children, doing real stuff. And we have the sons and daughters over time, multiplied, married, had families, and eventually we end up with Noah, the flood, the bottleneck, and then we end up with the people at the Tower of Babel, diversifying into the people groups we have today. But biologically, we are very, very closely related. All right, so the last few minutes, I want to quickly look at 3 other examples of creation. First is the human eye. Now, Richard Dawkins again says the human eye is just a hodgepodge. It's badly designed. It's wired back to front. It's just ridiculous. No sane designer would ever design something as crude and cobbled together as the eye. Now, we've got some great articles in Creation Magazine, and there's one there, The Complex Human Eye. I really encourage you to look at that and just be taken in awe of how amazing the human eye is. And it's the same design as an eagle's eye. It's also wired back to front. But this idea that you'll see on the left-hand side, that picture there, they're called Mueller cells, and they were only found a few years ago, and they're like fibre optic channels that take the light through the blood vessels and the nerves to the retina. Incredible design that helps you focus, better colour clarity, brilliant design in our eyes. And Professor Dawkins, who has no qualifications in design, wipes it off as bad design. It's beautifully designed. Now, our eyes are optimal for us as humans living in our environment. Eagles have a different style of eye. So the eye's designed the same, but it's actually has a different function, so it's optimized in different ways. That's the first thing. The eye is an incredible example to me of brilliant design, amazing engineering design. The second one, right down in our bodies, every cell has these things called, has ATP synthase. Now, ATP is adenine triphosphate, and that's the energy currency of the body. That's what keeps you warm, that's what gives you metabolism. And these little machines create ATP, and they're actually powered, they're absolutely microscopic, they're powered by protons, so they're basically little electric motors. You've got trillions of them in your body. This is an incredible design. How they work, how they are put together, they are almost 100% efficient. Amazing evidence of design, these nanomotors within your bodies. Again, we've got some great articles about ATP synthase. The more we know, the more complex these things become. And we also have things in our bodies called kinesins or kinesins. And these are like little robots. They're not actually like alive walking along. They're actually just large complex molecules, but they have amazing functions in our body. And I've got a little 1-minute video that will show you what these things do. Again, evidence has only come out in the last few years about these kinesins and what they do, but these are going on in your body, every cell, all the time. Okay, so give this a go.
perform their intended function. This animation explains a lot of what over a number of years
You've got the volume, so
has happened.
I'll talk through it. Okay, sorry. I think it's actually stereo and we're only getting one channel of it. Sorry about that. So anyway, these things here, they're basically going along, they walk along microtubules in your cells, and they carry sacks of proteins and so on to different places. They've got like an address tag on them. So these little kinesins, they're not intelligent, they're just doing what they've been programmed to do. And they go along and they deliver these sacks of proteins and so on to different places in the cells, exactly as they've been designed. And each step they're taking, you have 125,000 of those steps per millimetre. That's how small they are. Aren't they incredible? Yeah. So sorry about that, the sound here. So the theme music was louder than the other. All right, and just want to talk about blood too. My wife Desma, she is a veterinary haematologist. She works in a vet lab in Hamilton, and she's studying animal blood all the time. She's looking at different things. And next week we're going to talk about dinosaur soft tissue and blood and so on. But blood is an incredibly powerful evidence for design. Obviously, if we lose blood, we're going to die, don't we? It's a really vital thing. And the Bible talks about life is in the blood. And now we know that blood is incredibly important to us. It gives us oxygen and nutrients, takes away waste products. It transports hormones around our bodies, which are signaling compounds. It fights infection. If you get a cut and so on, blood will go to a certain place, start to form, the platelets will form, infection-fighting things will move into place, all programmed perfectly. Heals up damage and it controls our hydration. Now, that diagram on the left there is of the blood clotting cascade. So if I cut myself, within a very short time, the blood flow eases off, and then you end up with a small scab forming. That clotting cascade is incredibly complex. If any of those factors goes wrong, you're basically dead. Either your blood will all coagulate at once and kill you, or you'll bleed to death because it won't stop. And if people who have haemophilia have only one factor that is actually slightly malformed, and you get haemophilia. And yet all these things are supposed to have evolved over millions of years, all the things that need each other. It's only functional when the whole thing is together. So the blood clotting cascade and blood itself is great evidence for design. And one last minute in closing, I want to come back to this thing about the whole of creation falling apart. It talks in Romans 8:20-22. For creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. This is all of creation, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole of creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. So there's a very well-established scientific thing called genetic entropy. And it's very simple. Entropy just means a tendency to fall apart. And so all our genomes across all of life is slowly falling apart. Bit by bit, every generation we pass on mutations to our children, and they pass it on. Now, natural selection weeds out the worst ones. If you end up with a mutation that is near fatal, you won't reproduce or you will die. But most mutations are near neutral. Natural selection can't see them. They're not going to be weeded out. They haven't actually affected your reproductive ability, or not immediately. So like rust in a car, you end up with a spot of rust, and next week you get more and more rust. Over time, your car falls apart. And so all of our genome is falling apart, and that's now causing major issues. You think of the thousands of genetic diseases we have today, all from this slow, gradual accumulation of corruption and mutations in our genomes. So we're all falling apart. And aging and cancers and so on all come from this idea of mutation as we fall apart. Okay, so I'm going to close now. Just want to let you know, come and see us at the table afterwards. I'm staying for the service, of course, and next week I'll be back again. But this is a book that's just come out about biodesign, a really, really powerful, thick book, amazing evidence of design right through nature. And I talked about young people struggling with their faith in university. This is a brilliant little book. If you have people who are at university struggling, this is a great book to encourage them to study well, to come out with a degree, even a PhD in environmental or evolutionary biology, but not lose their faith. And we're going to have a series of tracks out there, which you can help yourself to, please. That would be great. And lastly, 2 weeks' time, we have a creation and apologetics camp at Karakariki Christian Camp, which is just out of Whotawhata there. Come and see me afterwards. I'll bring some things next week. We'd love any of you who'd like to come along, Friday night, Saturday and Sunday morning. Right, thank you. That's a fairly hasty whiz through. Next week I'm going to slow it down and build on what we've talked about today and develop the idea of the flood and dinosaurs. And also, if any questions come up today or during the week, please pass them through to Pastor Shane and so on. We'll collate them together and we'll have time for questions to be answered next week that come out of today or things you think out during the week. All right, thank you. I'll pass back to you.